Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. I remember very vividly in pre-pandemic days when we could actually eat in a restaurant. Nan and I were doing that in a small restaurant in West Columbia. There happened to be only one other family in the restaurant at the time, and we could overhear their conversation without trying to. The waitress got their orders and then started to leave the table, and that's when the man at the table stopped her and said very genuinely, "We are about to have our prayer. Is there anything in your life you would like for us to pray for?" It wasn't showy, and he didn't ask her to wait while they prayed. What I saw that day was a genuine going to God in thanks and praise, and the sincere desire to offer prayer for someone else. This week we are talking about praying like Jesus, and earlier this week we talked about how Jesus very often went off into seclusion to pray. Those times were deep and long-lasting times of prayer for Jesus. But interestingly, those weren't the only times Jesus spent in prayer. There were times when his time in prayer was visible, when other people could see him praying. And more than that, there were times he prayed for others and let them know he was praying for them. And what's more than that, there were times when Jesus didn't pray for an individual prayer. Jesus didn't pray an individual prayer, but rather prayed on behalf of us all. Sometimes, especially before Jesus healed someone or cast out a demon, Jesus very visibly would pray before the crowd watching. Another very clear example is the story of the multiplication of loaves and fishes. You remember that story. The crowd had been listening to Jesus, and the only food they had to offer the crowd was a little boy's sack lunch of 2 small sardine-sized fish and 5 fist-sized barley loaves. Jesus invited them all to sit down, and he took the meager meal and looked heavenward, prayed, and there was enough for all with some leftovers to boot. Jesus didn't hide his times of prayer. Yes, he went off alone to pray sometimes to get away from all the distractions of the world, but sometimes the very distractions and busyness of the world itself requires prayer right there and then. In those times, Jesus didn't hesitate and turned to God in prayer. Another interesting time of Jesus praying visibly was in the Garden of Gethsemane. In fact, this is one of the few times when the Bible speaks of Jesus kneeling and prostrating himself in prayer, giving us the posture Jesus used when he prayed. There's an old joke about 2 men on a park bench discussing the right posture for prayer. One advocated kneeling, and the other was certain standing was the correct posture. Suddenly, an electric line repairman stepped out of the bushes, having overheard, and he said, "I found the most fervent prayer I ever offered was hanging by my foot upside down about 30 feet off the ground." Prayer doesn't come from the posture. It comes from the heart. In the Bible, Jesus often prayed for others, and our prayers should be on behalf of others too. Many times I have heard someone in the hospital tell me that they felt people's prayers, and when we pray for others, we are doing it out of love and compassion for them. This is what God would have us do. Jesus also prayed corporately. We might not think of that very often, and I believe most of us pray individually. Prayer tends to be an I thing. This is what I would like to happen, etc. But we can't ignore the Lord's Prayer, which begins, "Our Father," implying that we are more than individuals. Over and over in the prayer, it asks, "Give us," not "give me." We are part of a family of brothers and sisters under God, and our prayer is not just individual, but corporate. Each of our prayers involves all of our prayers. Interestingly, when the disciples asked Jesus to teach them to pray like he did, this corporate prayer was what he gave them. I suspect that most of us pray our own individual prayers easily and regularly. I also suspect that other than the Lord's Prayer, prayers acknowledging our shared humanity this way are few and far between. Jesus prayed openly and visibly and corporately for us. May we learn to pray like him. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.